Hi, I'm Emily. 3 years ago, my brother didn't just steal my idea. He took my dream, my code, my future, and slapped his name on it. He smiled at me across the conference table as investors handed him checks with more zeros than I'd ever seen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. And when I tried to speak up, they patted me on the head like I was just the little sister having a tantrum. But here's what they didn't count on. I never learned how to stay silent. I never learned how to make myself small. And I definitely never learned how to let go of what's mine. Have you ever poured your heart and soul into creating something only to watch someone else take credit? What would you do if the person stealing your work was the one person who's supposed to have your back? It had been one of those classic Seattle days, rain drumming against my apartment windows, the kind of persistent drizzle that makes the world outside look like it's melting. I'd been coding for 16 hours straight, surviving on cold coffee and pure determination. My eyes burned, my back ached, but on my screen was magic, the final prototype of Access AI, an algorithm I'd been building for nearly 2 years. I stretched, feeling the satisfying pop in my shoulders, and finally hit save on the completed code. 3 years of research, thousands of hours of testing, and countless sleepless nights had culminated in this moment. I'd created something revolutionary, an AI system that could translate complex online content into simplified formats for people with learning disabilities, all in real time. It wasn't just accessible technology. It was freedom for millions of people who'd been left behind in the digital age. I reached for my phone to text Sarah, my best friend, and the only other person who truly understood what this moment meant. My fingers hovered over the screen when an email notification slid in, an invitation to my brother Mark's engagement party next weekend at our parents' lakeside house in Bellevue. The sight of the Parker family crest at the top of the digital invitation made something twist in my stomach. I hadn't stepped foot in that house since the argument at last year's Thanksgiving dinner. I could still hear Mark's voice, smooth as silk but sharp as a blade. "Come on, Em. Nobody's going to invest in accessibility software. There's no money in helping people who can't pay premium prices." I'd left that night with my laptop clutched to my chest and my father's disappointed sigh following me out the door. "When are you going to do something practical with that brain of yours, Emily?" The words had clung to me like the persistent Seattle rain. I was about to delete the invitation when a second email appeared below it. "My mother, please come, sweetheart. The whole family will be there. Mark has big news to share." I dropped my phone onto my desk like it had burned me. Classic Rebecca Parker, always the diplomat, always trying to smooth things over without addressing the actual problem. My brother could dismiss my life's work in front of everyone, and somehow I was still expected to show up with a smile and a gift wrapped in expensive paper. But something in me hesitated. Maybe it was exhaustion from the coding marathon, or maybe it was the small, stubborn part of me that still wanted my family to see what I'd built, to understand its value. I picked up my phone again and typed a brief response. "I'll be there." Then I turned to my desk where my grandfather's custom keyboard sat, the last gift he gave me before he died. A brilliant engineer ahead of his time, he was the only one who ever really saw me. The only Parker who believed that technology should serve everyone, not just those who could afford the newest gadget. I ran my fingers over the unique key layout he'd designed specifically for my smaller hands. "You've got a mind that can change the world, Emmy," he'd told me. "Don't let anyone convince you that your vision is too small." I pressed the power button on my laptop, watching the screen fade to black. Access AI was ready for investor presentations, and I had one scheduled for Monday morning after the engagement party. All I needed to do was get through one family event, without letting Mark's condescension throw me off my game. Simple, right? The day of the engagement party arrived with unusual sunshine, as if Seattle itself was making an effort for the Parker family gathering. I parked my weathered Honda Civic, Between gleaming luxury cars, acutely aware of the contrast. Software development paid my bills, but I'd poured every spare cent into Access AI's development instead of upgrading to the kind of car that wouldn't make my father wince when I pulled into the driveway. I grabbed the small, neatly wrapped gift from my passenger seat, a first edition of Vanessa's favorite author that had taken me weeks to track down, and made my way up the winding path to my childhood home. Before I could even knock, the massive oak door swung open to reveal my mother, perfectly coiffed as always, martini in hand despite the early hour. "Emily," she exclaimed, air-kissing both my cheeks. "You look tired, darling. Are you sleeping enough?" I resisted the urge to touch the dark circles I knew lingered under my eyes. "Good to see you too, Mom." The house was exactly as I remembered. Soaring. Ceilings, gleaming hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Lake Washington. A monument to my father's successful investment career, designed to impress rather than comfort. The great room was already filled with people clutching champagne flutes, their laughter a little too loud, their smiles a little too practiced. I recognized most of them. Family friends, business associates, cousins I only saw at events like these. Their eyes tracked me as I entered, curious and slightly judgmental, the prodigal daughter returning. And then I saw him, Mark, standing by the fireplace, one arm draped possessively around Vanessa's shoulders as he regaled a circle of rapt listeners. At 36, 3 years my senior, he looked every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit and designer watch. Our physical resemblance was undeniable. The same dark hair and hazel eyes. But where my features were softer, his were sharp, calculated. His gaze caught mine across the room, and for a split second, something flashed in his eyes. Not warmth. Not welcome. Something more like triumph? He raised his champagne glass in my direction, a gesture that felt more like a taunt than a greeting. I grabbed a sparkling water from a passing server and made my way through the crowd, accepting stilted hugs and fielding the usual questions about my little computer projects. Each time I tried to explain Access AI, eyes would glaze over, and the conversation would quickly shift to Mark's latest venture capital success or Vanessa's marketing prowess. "Emily!" My father's booming voice cut through the chatter. Thomas Parker, still intimidating at 65, clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You made it. Good, good. I was just telling the Wrights about Mark's latest project. Very exciting stuff." I froze. The Wrights. Daniel Wright was one of Seattle's most respected tech investors, known for backing early-stage startups with massive potential. I'd been trying to get a meeting with him for months. "Mr. Wright," I said, extending my hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I've followed your work with adaptive technology startups for years." Daniel Wright looked momentarily surprised, then pleased. "You know about the Horizon Accessibility Investment Portfolio?" "Of course," I replied. "Your funding of VoiceNav last year was game-changing for blind users. I actually have a—" "Emily dabbles in coding," my father interrupted, his tone dismissive. "But Mark's the one with the business acumen. Speaking of which, I think he's about to make his announcement." As if on cue, someone tapped a knife against a crystal glass, and the room fell silent. Mark stepped forward, pulling Vanessa with him, both of them glowing with the specific kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. "First," Mark began, "Vanessa and I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate our engagement." Polite applause rippled through the room. "But we have another announcement that we're equally excited about." My stomach tightened. Something in his tone, in the way his eyes briefly flicked toward me, set off warning bells. For the past year, I've been developing a revolutionary technology that's going to change the way people with learning disabilities interact with online content. The room tilted around me. No, it couldn't be. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We're calling it Vision Clear, Mark continued, his voice growing more animated. It's an AI-driven platform that translates complex digital content into accessible formats in real time. My sparkling water nearly slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. He was describing Access AI, my Access AI, down to the core functionality I'd spent years perfecting. We've already secured preliminary funding, Mark was saying, and we're in talks with major educational platforms for integration. In fact, he gestured toward Daniel Wright, we have some exciting news on that front that we'll be announcing very soon. The room erupted in applause and congratulations. I stood frozen, the noise washing over me like static. How? How did he know the details of my project? We barely spoke anymore, and I'd been careful about who I shared my work with. And then it hit me. The family Thanksgiving dinner last year. I'd left my laptop open when I went to help in the kitchen. Mark had been unusually interested in my work that night, asking questions he'd never bothered with before. I'd thought, foolishly, that he was finally taking an interest in what I did. I'd been so proud to show him the early prototype, explaining my vision while he nodded and asked such specific questions about the back-end architecture, the machine learning modules. He'd stolen it, straight from my computer while I was mashing potatoes in the next room. I pushed through the crowd toward him, heart hammering against my ribs. Mark, I said, my voice tight. Can I speak with you privately? His smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. Can it wait, sis? We're kind of having a moment here. No, I said, loud enough that several nearby conversations paused. It can't. With obvious reluctance, he excused himself and followed me into our father's study. The moment the door closed behind us, I turned on him. Vision Clear is Access AI. You stole my work. Mark had the audacity to laugh, though it didn't reach his eyes. Emily, come on. Just because we're working in similar areas doesn't mean similar areas. You described my algorithm, my interface design. Even the name is barely changed from my working title. He sighed, as if I were a child having a tantrum. Look, I know you had some ideas in this space, but ideas aren't execution. You've been tinkering with this for what, 2 years now? With no funding, no business plan, no go-to-market strategy. I have a meeting with investors on Monday, I said, my voice shaking. I have a complete prototype ready to demo. Something flashed across his face. Surprise, maybe even a flicker of concern. But it was quickly replaced by the smooth confidence he wore like expensive cologne. That's unfortunate timing, he said, straightening his cuffs. Because I'm demoing Vision Clear to the entire Wright investment team on Monday as well. 9 a.m. sharp at the Evergreen Innovation Center. The blood drained from my face. That was the exact time and location of my meeting. You can't do this, I whispered. I already have. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Be smart about this, Em. You know how it will look if you make a scene. The Parkers stick together, remember? Family image above all. The family mantra, drilled into us since childhood. Keep the arguments behind closed doors. Present a united front to the world. Never air the dirty laundry. That's rich, coming from you, I said, my voice gaining strength. You stole from your own sister. He shrugged, the gesture so casual it made my blood boil. I saw potential in a rough concept and developed it into something marketable. That's what I do. If you had the business sense to match your technical skills, you'd have done the same. I'm going to tell them the truth, I said. All of them, Wright, his team, everyone out there. For the first time, Mark's confidence wavered. They won't believe you. You know that, right? You're the little sister with the chip on her shoulder. I'm the one with the track record of successful exits and a network that trusts me. The worst part was, he was right. In the eyes of Seattle's tech investment community, Mark Parker was a known entity, Yale Business School, 6 years at a top tier, VC firm, 3 successful startup exits. I was just the quiet coder who'd never bothered with the networking events and industry politics. This isn't over, I said, turning toward the door. Actually, it is. His voice had regained its smooth edge. Oh, and Emily, I'd reconsider showing up on Monday if I were you. It would be embarrassing for everyone involved. I yanked open the door and nearly collided with my mother, who was clearly hovering nearby. Everything okay in here? She asked, her smile strained. People are asking for you both. Mark, Daniel Wright is particularly interested in hearing more about your announcement. Of course, Mark said, brushing past me as if our conversation had never happened. I'd be happy to discuss the details. My mother watched him go, then turned to me with a sigh. Emily, whatever disagreement you two are having, couldn't it wait? This is his engagement party. I stared at her. This woman who had raised me but never really seen me. He stole my work, Mom. My project. The one I've been building for 2 years. She blinked, her perfectly made-up face registering nothing but mild confusion. Oh, honey, I'm sure there's just been a misunderstanding. Your brother wouldn't do something like that. The certainty in her voice made something crack inside me. You don't even want to know what something like that is. Do you? You didn't ask what he took or what I built. You just automatically assume I'm wrong and he's right. Her eyes darted toward the door, clearly more concerned about who might overhear than about what I was saying. We can discuss this later, she said, patting my arm. Right now, let's just focus on celebrating Mark and Vanessa, shall we? Without waiting for my response, she turned and glided back to the party, leaving me standing alone in my father's study, surrounded by leather-bound books I was certain he'd never read, and awards for financial brilliance that had never extended, to recognizing the value in his own daughter's work. I leaned against his mahogany desk, struggling to breathe around the knot of rage and heartbreak in my chest. On the wall hung family photos, Mark's graduation, Mark's first job at the prestigious Hamilton Fund, Mark shaking hands with the governor. I searched for my face among them and found exactly one photo, my high school graduation, tucked in a small frame in the corner. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Sarah. How's the lion's den? Need an extraction? I took a deep, shuddering breath and typed, code red, Mark stole Access AI. He's pitching it to Wright on Monday. Her response came immediately. What? I'm coming to get you, and then we're going to destroy him. Despite everything, a small smile tugged at my lips. Sarah Chen had been my best friend since our freshman year at UW, when we were the only 2 women in our advanced algorithm design class. Brilliant, fierce, and unfailingly loyal, she had never understood my family's dynamics, never hesitated to tell me when I was letting them walk all over me. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and squared my shoulders. I could walk out right now, drive home, and lick my wounds in private. It's what I'd always done before. Or I could go back out there and make damn sure that Daniel Wright knew there was another side to this story. I strode back into the great room, my eyes scanning the crowd until I spotted my target. Mark had Daniel Wright cornered by the bar, gesturing expansively as he no doubt spelled out the profit projections for technology he hadn't created. I started moving toward them, only to be intercepted by my father. There you are, he said, his tone slightly accusatory. The Goldmans were asking about you. Martin's son just sold his startup to Google, did you hear? 32 years old and already set for life. Dad, I said, trying to step around him. I need to speak with Daniel Wright. His eyebrows shot up. About what? About the fact that Mark's presenting my work as his own. My father's expression darkened. Not this again, Emily. Can't you just be happy for your brother? He's doing, well, building something valuable. Why does that threaten you so much? The injustice of it made me want to scream. He stole my code, Dad, my actual work. This isn't about sibling rivalry. Keep your voice down, he hissed, glancing around, to make sure no one had heard. This is exactly the kind of emotional reaction that makes people in this industry not take you seriously. Before I could respond, there was another ping of crystal, and all eyes turned to the center of the room where Mark was raising his glass again. "If I could have everyone's attention once more," he called out. "I have one final announcement that I'm incredibly excited to share." My stomach dropped. What now? "I've just received confirmation that Vision Clear has been selected as one of 3 finalists for the Garrison Innovation Prize." Murmurs of impressed approval rippled through the crowd. The Garrison was the most prestigious recognition for accessible technology, with a $1 million grant attached. The judges were particularly impressed with our unique approach to real-time content transformation, Mark continued, his eyes finding mine across the room. "Something that's never been done before." That was it. Something in me snapped. I pushed, past my father, and walked directly to the center of the room, planting myself next to Mark. The surprise on his face was almost worth the hammering of my heart against my ribs. "I'd like to make a toast as well," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room. I raised my water glass. "To innovation, to groundbreaking ideas." I turned to face Mark directly. "And to the importance of giving credit, where credit is due." A nervous titter ran through the gathered guests. Mark's smile tightened at the edges. "My brother has always had a talent for recognizing valuable opportunities," I continued. "Today is no exception." "Emily," my mother's voice carried a warning. I ignored her. "In fact, I'm so impressed with Mark's presentation of Vision Clear that I can't wait to show you all the original Access AI that I've been developing for the past 2 years. The code, the interfaces, the functionality. They're remarkably similar. Almost identical, you might say." The room went completely silent. I could feel the weight of every stare, the collective intake of breath. Mark's face had gone rigid, his eyes flashing a dangerous warning. "In fact," I continued, pulling my phone from my pocket, "I have the original GitHub repository right here, with timestamps on every commit going back 27 months. I'd be happy to show anyone who's interested." "That's enough," my father's voice boomed from behind me. "Emily, this is not the time or place." "Actually, I'd like to see that." Every head turned. Daniel Wright had stepped forward, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Mr. Wright," Mark began, his voice tight, "I can assure you—" "I'm sure you can," Wright said evenly. "But I make it a policy to investigate whenever there are competing claims to intellectual property, especially before investing significant capital." He turned to me. "Ms. Parker, I'd be very interested in seeing your repository, and perhaps we should reschedule Monday's meeting to include both of you." Mark's face had gone from flushed to ashen in the space of seconds. I could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes. How to spin this, how to discredit me, how to salvage the investment he thought was already secured. But it was too late. The perfect narrative he'd constructed was already cracking at the edges. "I think that's an excellent idea," I said, meeting Wright's gaze. "Transparency is always the best policy." The buzz in the room had risen to an uncomfortable pitch. Guests were whispering behind their hands, shooting curious glances between Mark and me. "I think that's enough excitement for one engagement party," my mother announced, her social smile firmly in place despite the tension radiating from her. "Why don't we move on to cake?" As the crowd awkwardly shifted toward the dining room, I felt a light touch on my arm. It was Vanessa, Mark's fiancée, her expression unreadable. "We should talk," she said quietly. "Not here. Tomorrow." I nodded, surprised. Vanessa and I had never been close. She'd always seemed to accept Mark's narrative about his weird, antisocial sister. But there was something in her eyes now that looked almost like respect. As I turned to leave, not interested in cake or further confrontation, I caught sight of Mark. He stood alone by the fireplace, his face a mask of barely controlled fury as he watched Daniel Wright exchange contact information with me. Our eyes met across the room, and in that moment, I knew something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in our lives, Mark Parker was afraid of his little sister, and I was just getting started. The drive back to my Capitol Hill apartment was a blur of raindrops and streetlights. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, but I barely noticed. All I could see was Mark's face. First, smug as he announced my technology as his own, then ashen when Daniel Wright agreed to look at my repository. I'd done it. After years of swallowing my words, of making myself smaller to fit into the Parker family portrait, I'd finally stood up, but the momentary satisfaction was already giving way to cold, practical fear. Mark had connections I didn't, resources I couldn't match, and the Parker family would close ranks around him. They always did. By the time I pulled into my apartment's cramped parking lot, the adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me shaky and exhausted. I trudged up the 3 flights of stairs, fumbling with my keys as rain dripped from my hair onto my shoulders. There she is, the woman of the hour. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor outside my apartment door, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, takeout containers from our favorite Thai place arranged beside her. "I figured you'd need this," she said, holding up a bottle of wine as she stood. "And before you ask, yes, I brought the good stuff, not the $8 swill we drank in college." The sight of her, familiar, loyal, uncompromising, made my throat tighten with unexpected emotion. I unlocked the door without speaking, afraid my voice would crack. Inside, my apartment looked exactly as I'd left it. Organized chaos. Whiteboards, covered in algorithms, sticky notes mapping user journeys, 3 monitors on my desk still displaying the final version of Access AI's interface. The culmination of 2 years of work that Mark had tried to steal in a single evening. Sarah moved around the tiny kitchen with the ease of long familiarity, uncorking the wine and pulling glasses from the cabinet while I sank onto the couch, suddenly bone-tired. "So," she said, handing me a generous pour of Cabernet, "start from the beginning. What exactly happened?" I took a long sip before answering, letting the wine warm me from the inside out. Mark announced his new venture, Vision Clear, as if he'd been working on it for months. Sarah, he described Access AI feature for feature. He's even targeting the same markets, the same integration platforms. Sarah's dark eyes narrowed. "How? Did he get access to your code?" I closed my eyes, remembering. "Last Thanksgiving, I brought my laptop to show Dad some of the progress I'd made. I thought, stupidly, that if he could just see what I was building, he might finally understand why it mattered to me." "Let me guess," Sarah said, her voice gentle. "He didn't." He barely glanced at it. Said something about niche markets being tough to monetize. The memory still stung. But Mark was different that night. He actually asked questions, seemed interested. I left my laptop open when Mom called me to help in the kitchen. "And Mark helped himself," Sarah finished, her expression darkening. "That absolute snake." "It gets worse," I said, reaching for one of the takeout containers. "He's scheduled to present to Wright's entire investment team on Monday. Same time, same place as my meeting. He knew, Sarah. He knew I'd lined up that presentation, and he deliberately scheduled over me." Sarah set her glass down with a sharp click. "Wright Investment Group doesn't fund copycats. They have a reputation for backing original technology. If you can prove you developed this first—" "I can," I said. "The GitHub repository has everything, every commit, every feature addition, every test result for the past 2 years. There's no way Mark can fake that kind of development history." "Good," Sarah said firmly. "Then you're going to take that evidence, along with every email, every design document, everything you have, and you're going to nail him to the wall." I picked at my pad thai, my appetite deserting me. It's not that simple. Mark has connections. I don't have. He went to Yale with half the venture capitalists in Seattle. And my family… My voice trailed off. Your family what? Sarah's tone sharpened. Will disown you? From what you've told me, they've never really claimed you to begin with. The words cut deep precisely because they were true. I thought of the family photos in my father's study, of the graduations and birthdays where my achievements were footnotes to Mark's latest success. Do you remember Professor Richardson? I asked, changing direction. Sarah blinked at the apparent non sequitur. Leo Richardson? From Advanced Machine Learning? Of course. He was the only faculty member who took female students seriously. He called me into his office during senior year, I said, the memory surfacing vividly. I'd just won that coding competition, the one with the natural language processing challenge. I remember, you crushed it. He said something I've never forgotten. He said, Emily, you have a gift, not just for code, but for seeing the people behind the technology. Don't let anyone convince you that's not valuable. I stood up, moving to my desk where my grandfather's custom keyboard sat. I ran my fingers over the worn keys, feeling the slight indentations where his hands had once rested. My grandfather used to say something similar, I continued. He built custom interfaces for people with motor control issues back when the tech industry thought accessibility was a charity project, not a market opportunity. He always told me that the real innovation wasn't in making things faster or flashier, but in making technology truly see people who'd been invisible. I turned to face Sarah, something solidifying inside me. Access AI isn't just code, it's a mission, and I'm not letting Mark reduce it to another bullet point on his resume. Sarah grinned, raising her wine glass in a toast. There she is. That's the Emily Parker I know. I clinked my glass against hers, feeling something shift inside me, resolve hardening into determination. We have 48 hours until that meeting. Let's make them count. The next morning dawned gray and misty, typical Seattle weather. That matched my mood as I nursed my second cup of coffee. Sarah had stayed late, helping me organize my evidence. Screenshots, emails to beta testers, early design documents, the certificate from the accessibility hackathon where I'd first tested, the prototype. But as convincing as the paper trail was, I knew it wouldn't be enough. Mark would have his own narrative, his own explanation for the similarities. I needed something more, something irrefutable. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Coffee? 10 a.m. at Bite and Brew. Vanessa. I stared at the screen, surprised. What could Mark's fiancée possibly have to say to me? Was this some kind of trap? I hesitated, then typed back, I'll be there. Bite and Brew was a small coffee shop nestled between tech startups in downtown Seattle, known for strong espresso and reliable Wi-Fi. I arrived early, choosing a corner table with a clear view of the door, my laptop open in front of me like a shield. Vanessa Goldman arrived precisely at 10, looking nothing like the polished, smiling woman from the engagement party. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face bare of makeup, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd slept as poorly as I had. Thanks for meeting me, she said, sliding into the chair across from me. I wasn't sure you would. I closed my laptop, studying her. I'm not sure why I did, honestly. She ordered a black coffee from the hovering barista, then turned back to me, her expression direct. I didn't know. Didn't know what? I kept my voice neutral. About Access AI, about what Mark did. She twisted the engagement ring on her finger, a massive diamond that caught the light. He told me he'd been developing VisionClear for over a year, that he'd hired a team of developers to execute his vision. And you believed him, I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Why wouldn't I? She countered. Mark has a proven track record. He's launched successful startups before, and She stopped, her expression faltering. He's a Parker, I finished for her. And Parkers don't lie, right? Parkers don't steal. They're above all that. She had the grace to look uncomfortable. I know how it sounds, but you have to understand, I've only heard Mark's side of things. He always described you as brilliant, but impractical, more interested in coding than commercialization. I felt a flicker of bitter amusement. That sounds like Mark. Did he also tell you I was emotional? Too sensitive for the cutthroat world of tech startups? Something like that, she admitted. But yesterday when you mentioned the GitHub repository with timestamps, she leaned forward. Emily, if what you're saying is true, if Mark really did steal your work, I need to know. I studied her, looking for any sign of deception. Vanessa had always struck me as ambitious, someone who'd recognized Mark's potential and attached herself to his rising star. But there was something in her eyes now, a genuine distress that didn't seem feigned. Why? I asked simply. She took a deep breath. Because I'm the one who connected him with Wright Investment Group. Daniel is my former boss. I vouched for Mark's integrity, for the originality of the technology. Her voice dropped lower. If I unknowingly helped him commit intellectual property theft, my reputation is on the line too. The pieces clicked into place. Vanessa wasn't just Mark's fiancée. She was his connection to the investors he needed. No wonder he'd been so confident about securing the funding. He'd been trading on her relationships, her credibility. I can show you the evidence, I said carefully, reopening my laptop. But I'm not sure what difference it will make now. Mark has already positioned himself as the face of this technology. Vanessa's jaw tightened. Show me. For the next hour, I walked her through the development history of Access AI, from the initial concept sketches 2 years ago to the fully functioning prototype I'd completed days earlier. I showed her commit logs, user testing videos, feedback from early beta testers. I opened the codebase and explained the core algorithms that made the real-time translation possible. Vanessa asked sharp, informed questions. I'd forgotten she had a background in tech marketing. She understood enough to follow the technical explanations and recognize the sophistication of what I'd built. When I finally closed the laptop, she sat back, her coffee long cold and untouched. He lied, she said, her voice flat. To me, to Wright, to everyone. She twisted her engagement ring again, this time pulling it all the way to her knuckle before pushing it back down. The presentation, slides he showed me last week. They're screenshots of your interface with different colors and fonts. That sounds like Mark, I said. He's always been good at repackaging other people's work. What are you going to do? She asked. It was the question I'd been wrestling with since the previous night. I'm going to the meeting on Monday. Said, I'm going to show Wright and his team exactly what I just showed you. Mark will fight back, she warned. He won't just concede, especially not publicly. I know. Vanessa hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a small USB drive. This might help. It's the presentation Mark prepared for Monday. He asked me to review it last night. I'm supposed to be helping with the marketing strategy. I stared at the drive, not reaching for it. Why would you give me this? Her eyes met mine steadily. Because I built my career on spotting genuine innovation and connecting it with the right investors. That's my value. If I can't tell the difference between originality and theft, I'm nothing in this industry. I took the drive, turning it over, in my palm. And what about your engagement? Your relationship with Mark? Something hardened in her expression. That's a separate issue. One I'll deal with after the dust settles. She stood, gathering her coat and bag. One more thing you should know. Your parents are investors in VisionClear. Initial seed funding. Mark told them it was a sure thing. An accessibility platform with guaranteed interest from major educational institutions. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My own parents had financially backed Mark's theft of my work. Had they known? Or had they simply trusted Mark without question, as they always did? "Thank you for telling me," I managed. Vanessa nodded once, then turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "For what it's worth, I think what you've built is remarkable. The way it adapts to different learning styles, the interface design, it's genuinely revolutionary." After she left, I sat for a long time, turning the USB drive over in my hands. The cafe buzzed around me. Developers from nearby startups hunched over laptops, baristas calling out orders, the hiss of the espresso machine providing a steady backdrop to my churning thoughts. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How do it go with the enemy's fiancé?" I typed back. "Interesting. She gave me Mark's presentation, and apparently my parents invested in Vision Clear." Sarah's response came immediately. "What? Call me now." Instead, I gathered my things and headed for the one place I needed to go before I could make my next move. It was time to confront the other half of this betrayal. The Parker family home looked different in daylight, less imposing, more sterile. The precisely trimmed hedges and mathematical perfection of the garden beds had always felt like an extension of my father's personality. Controlled, meticulous, brooking no deviation. I parked in the circular driveway and sat for a moment, gathering my courage. Through the large windows, I could see my mother moving around the kitchen, probably organizing the cleanup from yesterday's party. No sign of my father. Taking a deep breath, I approached the front door and rang the bell, feeling absurdly formal about entering the house where I'd grown up. My mother answered, surprise flashing across her face. "Emily, I wasn't expecting you." Her gaze darted past me to the driveway, checking to see if anyone else had come. "Your father isn't home." "I know," I said. "I wanted to talk to you." She hesitated, then stepped back to let me in. "Of course. I was just about to have tea." I followed her to the kitchen, the heart of the house that had never felt particularly warm. Everything gleamed. Stainless steel appliances, marble countertops, the copper pots hanging in perfect alignment above the island. "About yesterday," my mother began, filling the electric kettle. "I understand you were upset, but there are better ways to handle family disagreements than making a scene in front of everyone." Typical Rebecca Parker, more concerned with appearances than reality. I cut straight to the point. "Did you know that Mark stole my work when you invested in Vision Clear?" Her hand stilled on the kettle. "That's a very serious accusation." "Emily, it's not an accusation, Mom. It's a fact. One I can prove. What I want to know is whether you and Dad knowingly funded the theft of my intellectual property." She turned to face me, her composure slipping just slightly. "Your father and I invested in Mark's company because he came to us with a solid business plan, market research, and a working prototype. Unlike some people, he understands that good ideas need proper business infrastructure to succeed." The implication stung, but I pressed on. "Did you ever ask where the technology came from? Did you question how Mark, who has zero background in AI or accessibility software, suddenly developed a sophisticated algorithm in this specific niche?" "Mark has always had an eye for opportunity," she said, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "He sees market potential where others don't." "That's not an answer," my mother sighed, turning back to the tea preparation. "What do you want me to say, Emily? That we should have suspected your brother of theft? That we should have assumed the worst of him instead of supporting his business venture? I want you to acknowledge that you didn't even consider the possibility. That I might have been the original creator," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "That it never once occurred to you that the accessibility software Mark was suddenly passionate about might have come from the daughter who's been coding accessibility solutions since she was 17. She set 2 teacups on the counter with more force than necessary. "You've always been competitive with Mark, always measuring yourself against him instead of finding your own path. The unfairness of the statement took my breath away. My own path? Mom, I've been carving my own path since I realized I'd never fit the Parker family mold. I chose computer science when Dad wanted me to study finance. I focused on accessibility. Technology when you both told me there was no money in it. I've been building Access AI for 2 years while you and Dad dismissed it as a little project. And now that Mark has stolen it, you're still finding ways to make this my fault? No one is saying it's your fault, she began, but I cut her off. You're investing in Vision Clear, Mom. You're literally funding the company that's trying to profit from my stolen work. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. Your father handled the investment details. He said Mark had all the proper documentation, all the intellectual property paperwork in order. I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. Of course he did. Mark's always been good at making things look legitimate on paper. I pulled my laptop from my bag and set it on the kitchen island. I want to show you something. For the second time that day, I opened the Access AI repository, but this time I didn't just show the code. I pulled up videos of myself working on the project over the past 2 years, screen recordings I'd made to document the development process, videos I'd shared with Sarah when we were troubleshooting particularly tricky features. This is from 14 months ago, I said, playing a clip of myself explaining the core translation algorithm. And here's one from last summer, when I was implementing the dyslexia-specific interface adjustments. I clicked through to another video. And here's Mark at Thanksgiving, asking specific questions about those exact features. My mother stared at the screen, her teacup forgotten. In the video, Mark leaned over my shoulder, pointing at the screen, asking how the word simplification module identified complex vocabulary without losing nuanced meaning. That doesn't prove, she started, but her voice lacked conviction. Here's the GitHub history, I continued, pulling up the commit log. Every change, every addition to the code, time-stamped and signed with my developer credentials. Hundreds of commits over 2 years. I turned to look at her directly. What's more likely, Mom? That I've been systematically faking this development? History for years just to set Mark up? Or that Mark saw my nearly completed project and decided to claim it as his own? She didn't answer, but I could see the gears turning behind her eyes. Rebecca Parker was many things, but she wasn't stupid. I have a meeting with Daniel Wright and his investment team on Monday, I said, closing the laptop. I'm going to show them everything I just showed you. And when they compare my evidence to whatever Mark presents, the truth will be obvious. This will devastate him, she said quietly. His reputation, his career. What about my reputation? I asked. What about my career? Does that factor into your concerns at all? She had the grace to look away, her hands fidgeting with her teacup. Of course it does. You're both my children. I don't want to see either of you hurt. Then maybe you should have raised Mark to believe that stealing is wrong, I said, standing to leave. Or at least taught him not to steal from family. My mother's face tightened. Emily, wait. There must be a way to resolve this privately. If we could, just sit down, the 4 of us. You, Mark, your father, and I. It's too late for that, I said, gathering my laptop. Mark made this public when he announced Vision Clear to a room full of investors. He made it public when he scheduled a presentation to Wright's team using my technology. At the kitchen doorway, I paused. One more thing. You might want to check the terms of your investment in Vision Clear. If Mark falsified the intellectual property documentation, you and Dad could be liable when this all comes out. I left her standing in the kitchen, surrounded by gleaming surfaces and perfect order, the carefully constructed illusion of the Parker family success story beginning to crack around her. Outside, rain had begun to fall again, a fine mist that beaded on my jacket as I walked to my car. I felt drained, but oddly calm. For years, I'd tried to earn my place in my family's narrative, working harder, achieving more, always hoping that the next accomplishment would finally make them see me. But sitting there in my mother's spotless kitchen, watching her struggle to reconcile the evidence with the story she'd always told herself about her children, I realized something. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need them to recognize my worth or celebrate my achievements. I just needed them to get out of my way. My phone rang as I pulled away from the house. Leo Richardson, my old professor and mentor, now the director of the computer science department at the University of Washington. "Emily," he said when I answered, his voice warm with its familiar slight accent. "I just heard the most interesting rumor about a former student of mine developing revolutionary accessibility technology. Something about real-time content adaptation for learning disabilities?" Despite everything, I smiled. "News travels fast." "In the tech world? Like lightning," he chuckled. "Especially when Daniel Wright starts asking questions about who really developed what." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. "He's been asking about me?" "Called me this morning. Wanted to know if you were as brilliant as your academic record suggested or if you'd been, and I quote, carried by your team projects." A flare of indignation rose in me. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him the truth," Leo said simply. "That you were the most innovative programmer I'd encountered in 20 years of teaching. That your senior project on adaptive interfaces was so advanced we incorporated it into our curriculum. And that if he was trying to determine whether you were capable of developing the technology you're claiming as yours, the answer is an unequivocal yes." Something warm unfurled in my chest. Gratitude, vindication, a reminder that not everyone in my life had underestimated me the way my family had. "Thank you," I said softly. "No need for thanks. It's simply the truth." His tone shifted, becoming more serious. "Emily, whatever's happening with this technology, and I gather there's some dispute over its ownership, remember that your work speaks for itself. The code doesn't lie, even when people do." After I hung up, I drove not to my apartment, but to Sarah's place in Fremont, where I knew she'd be waiting with her laptop and her unwavering support. On the passenger seat beside me, my grandfather's custom keyboard seemed to gleam in the gray light, a physical reminder of the legacy I was fighting for. By the time I reached Sarah's colorful apartment building, I had made my decision. Mondays. Meeting wouldn't just be about defending my work. It would be about claiming my place in the industry on my own terms, without the Parker name to either help or hinder me. It was time to step out from my brother's shadow once and for all. The weekend blurred into a frenzy of preparation. Sarah's apartment became our command center, takeout containers and coffee cups accumulating as we built our case. We worked through Saturday night and into Sunday morning, fueled by caffeine and righteous anger. Sarah's roommate, a UX designer, named Talia, joined our efforts, lending her expertise to create clear visual comparisons between Access AI and what we now knew of Mark's Vision Clear. "Look at this," Talia said, pointing to her screen where she'd placed screenshots side by side. "He didn't even bother changing the navigation structure, just recolored it and moved 2 buttons. Sarah leaned in, her expression darkening. "That's not just theft, that's lazy theft." I rubbed my eyes, fighting fatigue. We'd been combing through the files from Vanessa's USB drive, comparing Mark's presentation with my original work. The similarities were damning, not just surface level interface elements, but the core architectural approach, the specific way I'd structured the machine learning models to adapt to individual reading patterns. "The question is," Sarah said, refilling my coffee mug, "how do we present this to Wright and his team? We need to be strategic." She was right. Daniel Wright wasn't just any investor. He was known for being thorough, methodical, and deeply protective of his firm's reputation. If we approached this wrong, it could backfire spectacularly. "We need to focus on the technology," I said, absently running my fingers over my grandfather's keyboard as I thought aloud. "Not the family drama, not the betrayal, just the clear, objective evidence that Access AI predates Vision Clear." Talia nodded. And we need to emphasize what makes your approach unique. The learning pattern recognition, the real-time adaptation, that's the revolutionary part. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I glanced down, then froze. "What is it?" Sarah asked, noticing my expression. I held up the phone so she could read the message. "Be smart about tomorrow. Take the co-founder title and 30%. Equity. This gets messy. We all lose. Last offer. Mark." Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "He's offering you a deal? After everything?" "A terrible deal," I clarified. "He steals my technology, then offers me minority ownership in a company built around my own work." I set the phone down, anger reigniting. Classic Mark. He still thinks he can dictate the terms. "Are you going to respond?" Talia asked. I shook my head. No, he doesn't deserve a warning about what's coming. We worked through the rest of Sunday, refining our presentation, organizing our evidence, anticipating Mark's counter-arguments. By nightfall, we had a comprehensive deck ready, clear, factual, and devastating in its precision. "This is good," Sarah said as we finally packed up around midnight. "Really good." "It has to be," I replied, sliding my laptop into my bag. Tomorrow isn't just about Access AI, it's about making sure Mark can never do this to anyone else. That night, back in my own apartment, sleep eluded me. I paced the small living room, mentally rehearsing my presentation, trying to anticipate every possible scenario. Around 3 a.m., exhaustion finally won out, and I collapsed onto my bed, drifting into uneasy dreams filled with boardrooms and accusatory glances. Monday morning dawned bright and clear, the Seattle rain having given way to unexpected sunshine. I stood before my bathroom mirror, studying my reflection as I buttoned my blazer, navy blue, professional but not flashy. I'd pulled my hair back into a simple, neat bun, applied minimal makeup, and worn my most comfortable heels. No distractions, nothing that could undermine the seriousness of what I was about to do. On my desk, my grandfather's keyboard sat beside a framed photo of him, the only family photo I displayed in my apartment. I touched it briefly, drawing strength from the memory of the one Parker who had truly seen and valued me. "Wish me luck, Grandpa," I whispered. Sarah and Talia were waiting outside my building, Sarah behind the wheel of her ancient Subaru, Talia in the back seat already reviewing our presentation on her tablet. "Ready for this?" Sarah asked as I slid into the passenger seat. I nodded, clutching my laptop bag. As ready as I'll ever be. The Evergreen Innovation Center loomed ahead, a sleek glass and steel structure in downtown Seattle, home to some of the most promising startups in the Pacific Northwest. My stomach tightened as we pulled into the parking garage. This building had represented a dream for so long, the place where Access AI would finally receive the recognition and funding it deserved. Now it felt like a battleground. We were early, arriving a full 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting time. The receptionist directed us to a small conference room where we could prepare. It wasn't the main presentation space, that would come later, but a holding area for candidates to gather their thoughts. "I'm going to check out the main conference room," Sarah said, her tone casual but her eyes alert. "See if I can get a sense of the setup." She returned 10 minutes later, her expression grim. "Mark's already here, with Dad." My heart sank. Of course Thomas Parker would be here to support his son. Of course this would become another Parker family show of force. "Anyone else with them?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "A couple of guys in suits, lawyers probably." She squeezed my shoulder. "But no sign of Wright or his team yet. They're in a separate room." Talia connected her tablet to the small conference room screen, bringing up our presentation for one final review. Let's go through the key points one more time. We were midway through when the conference room door opened. Daniel Wright himself stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Parker," he said with a nod. I thought we might have a word before the main presentation. Sarah and Talia exchanged glances but gathered their things without being asked, stepping out to give us privacy. Wright took a seat across from me, setting a leather portfolio on the table between us. In his mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes behind designer glasses, he exuded the confident calm of someone who had seen it all in the tech industry. I've done some research since our interesting encounter at your brother's engagement party, he began, his tone measured. Your academic record is impressive. Your work at Abernathy Tech similarly so, although you left rather abruptly 18 months ago to pursue independent projects. To develop Access AI, I clarified. So you've said. He opened his portfolio, revealing printouts of what looked like code fragments. I had my technical team review the GitHub repository you shared. They were quite impressed with the commit history. Very thorough, very consistent. Because it's genuine, I said, meeting his gaze directly. Wright nodded slightly. Here's what I'm struggling with, Ms. Parker. Your brother has an established track record in the business world. 3 successful exits, a strong network of industry, connections, and seemingly legitimate documentation for VisionClear's development. Seemingly being the operative word, I said. Indeed. Wright leaned forward. So I have 2 candidates for investment, both presenting remarkably similar technology, both claiming original development. One with business credentials but limited technical background. One with technical expertise but no commercial track record. If your team reviewed my repository, they'll have seen that Access AI's development predates any work Mark could claim on VisionClear, I said, fighting to keep the frustration from my voice. They did note that, Wright acknowledged. They also noted several unusual elements in your brother's technical documentation. Inconsistencies in coding style, architectural decisions that don't align with his previous tech projects. A small flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Wright's team had seen the discrepancies. They weren't dismissing my claims outright. Mr. Wright, I said carefully, I understand your dilemma, but this isn't a case of similar ideas developed independently. Mark had direct access to my code at our family Thanksgiving last year. I can prove it. And Vanessa Goldman, his own fiancée, has confirmed that he's been misrepresenting the origin of the technology. Wright's eyebrows rose marginally at the mention of Vanessa. Ms. Goldman spoke with you? Yes. She provided me with a copy of Mark's presentation. I hesitated, then added, she values her professional reputation too much to be associated with stolen intellectual property. Wright was silent for a moment, studying me with an intensity that made me want to fidget. I resisted the urge, meeting his gaze steadily. The main presentation is in 20 minutes, he finally said, standing. Both you and your brother will present your cases to my entire investment team. I suggest you bring your strongest evidence. As he turned to leave, I found my voice again. Mr. Wright, my parents are investors in VisionClear. I thought you should know that before we proceed. He paused, looking back at me. And you're telling me this, why? Because transparency matters, I said simply. Even when it's uncomfortable. Something flickered in his expression, respect, perhaps, or at least interest. He nodded once, then left, closing the door quietly behind him. Sarah and Talia returned immediately, their expressions questioning. What happened? Sarah demanded. I filled them in quickly, the tension in my shoulders easing slightly. His team found inconsistencies in Mark's documentation. They're taking this seriously. That's a good sign, Talia said, reconnecting her tablet to the screen. Let's make a few adjustments to our opening slides based on this. Hit the technical inconsistencies harder up front. We worked rapidly, fine-tuning our approach when my phone buzzed again. A text from Vanessa. They're planning something. Mark just huddled with the lawyers and your father. Be careful. I showed the message to Sarah, who frowned. What could they possibly do at this point? The evidence is clear. This is Mark we're talking about, I reminded her. He always has another play. At 5 minutes to 10, a different assistant appeared to escort us to the main conference room. My heart hammered against my ribs as we walked down the sleek hallway, our footsteps muffled by plush carpeting. The conference room was imposing, a long glass table surrounded by ergonomic chairs, state-of-the-art presentation screens on 2 walls, windows offering a panoramic view of the Seattle skyline. Already seated were 7 people, Wright's Investment Team, according to their nameplates. Daniel Wright himself sat at the head of the table, his expression neutral. And there was Mark, standing with our father and 2 men in expensive suits, all of them clustered near the presentation podium. Mark looked immaculate in a tailored charcoal suit, his confidence seemingly unshaken. He met my eyes briefly, something like pity flashing across his face before he turned away. "Ah, Ms. Parker," Wright said as we entered. "Please take your places. We'll begin momentarily." I moved to the opposite side of the room from Mark, Sarah, and Talia flanking me protectively. My father didn't acknowledge me at all, his attention fixed on his phone as if the impending showdown between his children was a minor inconvenience in his busy day. Wright addressed the room once everyone was settled. "As you all know, we're here under unusual circumstances. 2 separate parties have presented similar technology for our consideration. Vision Clear, represented by Mark Parker, and Access AI, represented by Emily Parker." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "Both claim original development of an marquee, AI-driven accessibility platform for users with learning disabilities. Our task today is to determine the facts before any investment decisions are made." He gestured toward Mark. "Mr. Parker will present first, followed by Ms. Parker. Each presentation is limited to 15 minutes, with 10 minutes for questions from our team. We ask that there be no interruptions during the presentations. Is that clear?" Everyone nodded, the tension in the room palpable. Mark stepped to the podium, smoothly connecting his laptop to the presentation system. His opening slide appeared on the screens, Vision Clear's logo, sleek and professional, with the tagline, "Revolutionizing Digital Accessibility." "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice confident, "what you're about to see represents over a year of focused development and testing. Vision Clear addresses a critical gap in the educational technology market, the need for real-time content adaptation for users with learning disabilities." I watched in growing disbelief as he launched into his presentation. It wasn't just that he was describing my technology, he was using my exact terminology, the specific phrases I'd developed to explain Access AI's approach. The machine learning modules I'd spent months perfecting were presented as if they were his own creation, with only the naming conventions changed. Beside me, Sarah's knuckles whitened as she gripped her tablet. Talia discreetly placed a calming hand on her arm. Mark continued smoothly, walking the investment team through Vision Clear's functionality. The screens displayed interface demonstrations that were unmistakably derived from Access AI. The same workflow, the same user experience, just with different colors and slightly repositioned elements. Our proprietary learning pattern recognition algorithm sets Vision Clear apart from anything currently on the market, Mark declared, swiping to a slide showing technical specifications. By continuously adapting to the user's interaction patterns, we create a truly personalized experience that significantly improves comprehension and retention. My proprietary algorithm, my personalization approach, my research and testing. I forced myself to breathe evenly, to keep my expression neutral despite the rage building inside me. Getting emotional now would only play into the narrative that Mark had undoubtedly constructed, the unstable little sister trying to claim credit for her brother's success. Mark moved on to market projections, citing partnerships with educational platforms that I'd been quietly cultivating for months. He mentioned pilot programs with dyslexia advocacy groups that I had personally reached out to during Access AI's development. When he finally concluded, the investment team appeared impressed, several of them nodding appreciatively. My father watched with undisguised pride, while the lawyers scribbled notes, occasionally exchanging glances. "Thank you, Mr. Parker," Wright said. "Questions from the team?" The next 10 minutes were excruciating. Wright's team asked detailed questions about Vision Clear's development timeline, technical architecture, and market strategy. Mark answered smoothly, occasionally deferring technical details with a casual, "My development team could provide more specifics on that particular module." A development team that didn't exist. Finally, it was my turn. I approached the podium, connected my laptop, and took a deep breath. The room felt suddenly smaller, all eyes trained on me with varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity. My opening slide appeared, simpler than Mark's, but clearer. Access AI, original development timeline and evidence. "Thank you for the opportunity to present today," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "What I'm about to show you is not just a product pitch, but a documentation of intellectual property theft." From the corner of my eye, I saw Mark shift in his seat, his confident smile faltering slightly. "Access AI is the result of 2 years of dedicated development," I continued, advancing to a slide showing my GitHub commit history. "Every stage of its evolution is thoroughly documented, from initial concept to functional prototype. What Mr. Parker presented to you moments ago was not Vision Clear. It was my technology, renamed and repackaged without authorization." I moved methodically through the evidence, showing side-by-side comparisons of my original interface designs and Mark's Vision Clear versions. I displayed snippets of my code alongside fragments from Mark's presentation, highlighting the identical architectural approaches. "These aren't coincidental similarities," I emphasized. "They're direct appropriations from work I began in early 2022, long before Vision Clear allegedly existed." One of Wright's team members leaned forward. "Ms. Parker, these similarities are striking, but couldn't they be explained by 2 developers independently arriving at similar solutions to the same problem?" "An excellent question," I acknowledged, "but the pattern recognition algorithm at the core of Access AI isn't a standard approach. It's a novel methodology I developed specifically to address the challenges of real-time content adaptation." I navigated to a video recording from the previous Thanksgiving, showing Mark leaning over my shoulder as I demonstrated the prototype. "This footage shows Mr. Parker examining Access AI's early version last November," I explained. 3 weeks later, he registered Vision Clear LLC and began seeking investment, claiming to have developed the same technology independently. The room had grown very quiet. Mark's easy confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by a rigid stillness that reminded me of a predator realizing it had been cornered. "Furthermore," I continued, "I'd like to share communications from Vanessa Goldman, Mr. Parker's fiancée, confirming that she was unaware of the technology's true origin when she connected him with Wright Investment Group." I glanced at my father, whose expression had shifted from pride to something more guarded. "I'd also like to note that my parents are early investors in Vision Clear, having been similarly misled about its development." Mark stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. She's manipulating evidence because she's jealous of my success. She's always been—" "Mr. Parker," Wright interrupted sharply, "you'll have an opportunity to respond after Ms. Parker completes her presentation. Please sit down." Mark sank back into his chair, shooting a desperate look at our father, who was now studying his shoes with great interest. I continued methodically, laying out the technical evidence, the development timeline, the beta testing results that predated Mark's alleged work on Vision Clear. I showed emails from educational partners confirming our early discussions about Access AI integration. I displayed certification from the Accessibility Hackathon where I'd first tested the prototype. "In conclusion," I said, coming to my final slide, "Access AI represents 2 years of dedicated work to make digital content truly accessible to people with learning disabilities. It's not just a business opportunity, It's a mission to ensure that knowledge isn't limited to those whose brains process information in conventional ways. I paused, looking directly at Wright. I'm not here asking you to choose between two similar products. I'm asking you to recognize Access AI as the original technology, and to acknowledge that Vision Clear is a fraudulent appropriation of my work. As I returned to my seat, the silence in the room was deafening. The investment team exchanged glances, several of them reviewing notes or tapping queries into their tablets. Wright cleared his throat. Thank you, Ms. Parker. We'll now take questions from the team. The questions came rapidly, detailed, technical inquiries about Access AI's development that I answered easily, drawing on my intimate knowledge of every aspect of the system. With each response, I could see the conviction growing in the eyes of Wright's team. They were engineers and technical experts themselves. They recognized authentic development when they saw it. When the question period ended, Wright turned to Mark. Mr. Parker, would you like to respond to these allegations? Mark stood, his composure recovered but strain showing around his eyes. Absolutely. What my sister has presented is a deliberate mischaracterization of events. Yes, I saw an early version of her project last Thanksgiving, but what I recognized was a promising concept being poorly executed. He paced slightly, his hands moving in controlled gestures. Vision Clear took inspiration from multiple sources, including Emily's early work, but we've substantially improved and expanded upon those initial ideas. The core algorithms, the user experience design, the integration framework, these are all original developments by my team. Your non-existent team, I interjected, unable to help myself. Wright raised a hand for silence. Mr. Parker, can you provide documentation of this team's work? Development logs, meeting notes, early prototypes? Mark hesitated, just long enough to be noticeable. Of course, though some of our documentation is protected under NDAs with our development partners. One of Wright's technical advisors, a woman with sharp eyes and sharper questions, leaned forward. Mr. Parker, your presentation included specific details about a machine learning approach for pattern recognition in dyslexic reading behaviors. Can you explain, in technical terms, how that algorithm functions? Mark's smile tightened. As I mentioned, I focus on the business development aspects. The technical implementation was handled by our engineering team. Who aren't here, the advisor noted. Ms. Parker was able to explain every technical aspect of her system in detail. Shouldn't you, as the CEO of Vision Clear, be able to do the same? The lawyers flanking my father exchanged glances. One of them slid a note to Mark, who glanced at it before clearing his throat. I believe we're getting sidetracked by technical minutiae, he said smoothly. The core issue is market viability. Vision Clear has secured preliminary partnerships, developed a go-to-market strategy, and assembled the business infrastructure necessary for success. Ideas are valuable, but execution is everything. Wright leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Indeed, execution is crucial, which is why we're quite interested in determining who actually executed the development of this technology. He turned to his team. I believe we have enough information for now. Mr. and Ms. Parker, thank you for your presentations. We'll need some time to confer privately before making any decisions. As the investment team stood to move to a separate room, my father finally approached me, his expression tightly controlled. Was this necessary? He asked, his voice low, enough that only I could hear. Embarrassing your brother? Endangering our investment? There were other ways to handle this. I met his gaze steadily. Like what, Dad? Accepting 30% of my own company? Pretending Mark didn't steal 2 years of my work? You could have been partners, he insisted. Pooled your resources, your different strengths. The Parker name means something in this industry. Yes, I agreed. It means connections and doors opening without question. It means people taking Mark's word over mine simply because he's Thomas Parker's son, but it doesn't mean integrity, does it? Something flickered in his eyes. hurt, perhaps, or simply annoyance at being challenged. Your grandfather would be disappointed by this. Public spectacle. The mention of my grandfather ignited something fierce inside me. No, Dad. Grandpa built his career on honesty and invention. He'd be disappointed that his son raised a thief and then defended him. My father's face hardened, but before he could respond, one of the lawyers pulled him aside, speaking urgently in hushed tones. Across the room, Mark stood alone, staring out the window at the Seattle skyline, his shoulders rigid with tension. Sarah squeezed my arm gently. You did well. Really well. It's not over yet, I reminded her. Mark always has a backup plan. The next 30 minutes stretched endlessly. Talia brought us coffee from the reception area, while Sarah paced the length of the conference room, occasionally shooting glaring looks at Mark and the lawyers, who were huddled in intense discussion. Finally, Wright and his team returned, their expressions giving nothing away. After careful consideration of the evidence presented by both parties, Wright began, we've reached several conclusions. The room went completely still, everyone's attention fixed on Wright. First, the technical documentation and development history provided by Ms. Parker offers compelling evidence that Access AI was conceived and substantially developed prior to the formation of VisionClear LLC. Mark made a small, abortive gesture, as if to interrupt, then subsided when one of the lawyers placed a restraining hand on his arm. Second, Wright continued, the similarities between the technology presented as VisionClear and the original Access AI are too numerous and specific to be coincidental or inspired. They indicate direct appropriation of intellectual property. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear Wright's next words. Therefore, Wright Investment Group will not be pursuing any investment relationship with VisionClear under its current ownership and claimed intellectual property status. The lawyers were whispering urgently to my father now, their expressions grave. Mark stood perfectly still, his face ashen. As for Access AI, Wright said, turning to me, we remain extremely interested in the technology and its potential. We would like to continue discussions about possible investment, contingent upon complete resolution of any intellectual property disputes. He glanced meaningfully at Mark before adding, perhaps the involved parties would benefit from resolving these issues privately before further legal complications arise. With that, Wright adjourned the meeting. As his team gathered their materials, several of them approached me with business cards and quiet compliments on the technology. The technical advisor who had challenged Mark shook my hand firmly. Impressive work, she said. Both the technology and the presentation today. We should talk further about the pattern recognition algorithm. I have some thoughts on potential applications beyond educational content. As the investment team filed out, only the Parkers and their lawyers remained in the conference room, the atmosphere thick with unspoken tension. My father was engaged in intense conversation with the legal team, while Mark stood apart, staring at nothing. Let's go, I said to Sarah and Talia, gathering my things. I had no interest in further confrontation or hollow apologies. As we turned to leave, Mark finally moved, stepping into my path. His face was drawn, the confident mask completely fallen away. You didn't have to do this, he said, his voice low. We could have worked something out. You're right, I agreed. We could have. If you'd approached me honestly from the beginning, if you'd asked to collaborate instead of stealing my work, things might have been different. I did you a favor, he insisted, a flash of the old arrogance returning. You never would have gotten a meeting with Wright without my connections. You never would have secured the partnerships I lined up. We'll never know, will we? I shouldered my bag. But I do know this. I'd rather fail honestly than succeed by stealing from others. How self-righteous, he sneered. Enjoy your moral victory while you can. This isn't over. Actually, Mark, I think it is. The voice came from behind us. Vanessa, standing in the doorway, her expression resolute. At least for you. She crossed the room to stand beside me, pointedly not looking at my brother. Daniel called me, told me what happened. She turned to me. I'd like to talk with you about Access AI when you have time. My marketing expertise is still available if you're interested. Without Mark's involvement, of course. Mark stared at her, his expression shifting from shock to anger to something like desperation. Vanessa, you can't seriously. I can, and I am, she interrupted, her voice cool but firm. My professional reputation means everything to me, Mark. I won't be associated with stolen technology. She held out her hand to me. Emily, maybe we could get coffee this week. I think we have a lot to discuss. I shook her hand, surprised but not displeased by this unexpected alliance. I'd like that. As we left the conference room together, me, Sarah, Talia, and now Vanessa, I felt lighter than I had in years. The cool Seattle air hit my face as we emerged from the Evergreen Innovation Center. The city spread before us under a rare clear sky. What now? Sarah asked, a grin spreading across her face. Besides champagne, obviously. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past shifting off my shoulders, making space for something new. Now we build Access AI into everything. It can be. The right way, with the right people. The future stretched before me. Uncertain but full of possibility. Finally free from Mark's shadow and my family's expectations. For the first time in my life, I was writing my own story. And I couldn't wait to see what came next. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of meetings, calls, and strategic planning sessions. The Evergreen Innovation Center had become a second home. Daniel Wright had offered me temporary office space while we worked out investment details, a gesture that spoke volumes about his confidence in Access AI's potential. Today marked our most significant milestone yet, a formal demonstration for Wright's entire portfolio team, followed by the signing of preliminary investment documents. I arrived early, my stomach fluttering with a mixture of excitement and lingering anxiety. Though Mark had been effectively sidelined after the confrontation, his parting threat, "This isn't over," occasionally echoed in my mind during quiet moments. I hadn't heard from him since that day, a silence that felt more ominous than reassuring. Sarah met me in the lobby, professional in a charcoal pantsuit, but betrayed by the enormous coffee in her hand and the slight shadows under her eyes. We'd worked until 2 a.m. finalizing the demonstration, determined to make it flawless. "Ready for this?" she asked, falling into step beside me as we headed for the elevator. "As I'll ever be," I replied, adjusting the strap of my laptop bag. Inside was my grandfather's keyboard, which I'd brought as a talisman of sorts, a reminder of why this mattered beyond business success. The elevator doors opened on the 15th floor, revealing a reception area more impressive than the conference rooms below. This was the heart of Wright Investment Group's operation, where decisions affecting millions of dollars and countless tech careers were made daily. Vanessa was already there, reviewing notes with Talia. Over the past 2 weeks, they'd formed an unexpected but effective partnership, Vanessa's marketing savvy complementing Talia's design expertise. The engagement ring was gone from Vanessa's finger, replaced by a simple silver band that had been her grandmother's, a reclamation of identity I recognized all too well. "The portfolio managers just arrived," Vanessa informed us, straightening. A stack of custom-designed Access AI brochures. "Wright's bringing them up to speed on the technology basics before your demonstration." I nodded, trying to calm my racing heart. These weren't just any investors. They represented the next level of funding that would take Access AI from promising prototype to market reality. "Any word on the university partnership?" I asked, referring to the potential deal with the University of Washington's accessibility program that Vanessa had been negotiating. They're sending their director to today's demo, she replied with a small smile. Off the record, they're very interested. If they sign on, 3 other major universities have indicated they'll follow. Sarah squeezed my shoulder. Not bad for 2 weeks of legitimate business development. I returned her smile, but my response was cut short by the arrival of Daniel Wright, flanked by 6 sharply dressed people, the portfolio management team, each responsible for different market segments within Wright's extensive investment empire. Emily, Wright greeted me, extending his hand. Everything ready for the demonstration? Absolutely, I assured him, shaking his hand firmly. We've even incorporated some of the suggestions from your technical team. Excellent. He turned to make introductions. Everyone, this is Emily Parker, the developer and CEO of Access AI. You've all reviewed the technical documentation and market analysis. Today, we'll see the technology in action. I shook hands with each team member, noting their specialties: education technology, accessibility markets, AI implementation, enterprise integration. Wright had assembled decision-makers from every relevant sector, a clear signal that he was serious about this investment. If you'll all follow me, I said, gesturing toward the demonstration room. We've prepared several real-world scenarios to showcase Access AI's capabilities. The demonstration room was state-of-the-art, with a central table surrounded by comfortable chairs and large display screens on 3 walls. Sarah took her position at the control console while I moved to the presenter's spot at the head of the table. Access AI was born from a simple observation, I began as the lights dimmed slightly. The digital world assumes everyone processes information the same way, but for the 15 to 20% of people with learning differences like dyslexia, ADHD, or processing disorders, that assumption creates invisible barriers to knowledge. On the main screen, a typical web page appeared: dense text, complex navigation, multiple columns. This is how most content appears online, I explained. Now, let me show you how the same content looks to someone with moderate dyslexia. Sarah activated the simulation, and the text on screen began to warp subtly, letters shifting position, words blurring at the edges. Several of the portfolio managers leaned forward, their expressions changing from polite interest to genuine engagement. Access AI doesn't just make static adjustments, I continued, nodding to Sarah. It learns from each user's interaction patterns, continuously refining its adaptations. The demonstration progressed through various scenarios: academic content, professional documentation, social media interfaces, showing how Access AI transformed each experience in real time based on user-specific learning patterns. The core innovation, I explained, pulling up the visualization of the pattern recognition algorithm, is this adaptive learning system. Unlike existing accessibility tools that apply one-size-fits-all solutions, Access AI creates a unique profile for each user, evolving as their needs change. The education specialist raised her hand. How scalable is this? Could it handle, say, an entire university system with thousands of users? Absolutely, I confirmed. The architecture was designed with scalability as a priority. Each user profile requires minimal storage, and the processing occurs client-side wherever possible to reduce server load. The questions continued: technical, financial, logistical, each one allowing me to showcase another aspect of Access AI's capabilities. The energy in the room was palpable, that distinctive excitement that emerges when investors recognize genuine potential. As the formal presentation concluded, Wright stepped forward. We've arranged for some real-world testing. If you'll direct your attention to the side screen. The screen flickered to life, showing a video conference connection to what appeared to be a classroom. A woman in her 40s smiled into the camera, surrounded by 6 teenagers with laptops. Emily, this is Dr. Helena Martinez from the Beechwood Learning Center, Wright explained. Her students have been testing an early version of Access AI for the past week. My heart jumped. This was unexpected. I'd provided Wright with a beta version, but I hadn't known he'd arranged independent testing. "Hello, Emily," Dr. Martinez greeted me. "We've been eager to meet you. Your technology has created quite a stir among our students." She turned to the teenagers. "Would you like to share your experiences?" One by one, the students spoke. A girl whose severe dyslexia had previously required all her reading material to be audio converted, a boy with ADHD who struggled with information overload on standard websites, twins with processing disorders who had been falling behind in their online courses. Each described how Access AI had transformed their learning experience. "I actually finished an entire article without getting a headache," the girl with dyslexia said, her voice carrying a note of wonder. "That's never happened before." The way it adjusted when I kept losing focus, like it could tell exactly when. "I needed things simplified. That was amazing," added the boy with ADHD. Dr. Martinez smiled at their enthusiasm. "We've been documenting their progress metrics, reading comprehension up an average of 37% across all participants. Task completion time decreased by 42%. But the numbers don't capture what matters most: their renewed confidence and engagement." I blinked rapidly, fighting unexpected emotion. This was why I'd built Access AI, not for investors or markets or even professional validation, but for these students and millions like them who deserved equal access to information. "Thank you," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. "Your feedback is invaluable." After the video connection ended, the room erupted in discussion, the portfolio managers talking animatedly among themselves. Wright caught my eye and gave a subtle nod. This was going even better than expected. As the group moved to an adjacent conference room for financial discussions, Vanessa appeared at my side. "That was perfect," she murmured. "The live testimonials were Wright's idea. He wanted authentic user reactions." "It worked," I acknowledged. Even the enterprise integration specialist was taking notes. "Speaking of unexpected guests," Vanessa said, her voice dropping lower, "you should know your father is here." My momentary elation vanished. "What? Why?" "He requested a meeting with Wright after our session. I don't know what about, but—" She hesitated. "Mark's been meeting with other investment groups. Rumor has it he's trying to reposition VisionClear as a competing product, rather than admitting it was derived from your work." A cold weight settled in my stomach. Of course Mark wouldn't simply concede defeat. And of course my father would be working behind the scenes to salvage his son's reputation and his own investment. "Does Wright know?" "Yes," Vanessa confirmed. "He insisted your presentation come first, without distraction. He said your father could wait." I smiled slightly at that. A small but significant shift in the traditional Parker family hierarchy. Thomas Parker wasn't accustomed to waiting for anyone, least of all his daughter. The investment discussion proceeded smoothly, with Wright's team outlining funding stages, growth targets, and market penetration strategies. Throughout the conversation, I remained hyper-aware of my father's presence somewhere in the building, a shadow hanging over what should have been an unmitigated triumph. As the meeting concluded with handshakes and scheduling of follow-up sessions, Wright approached me privately. "Your father is waiting in my office," he said without preamble. "I thought you should know before you encountered him unexpectedly." I appreciated his directness. "Any idea what he wants?" "He claims to have a proposition that would benefit all parties," Wright replied, his tone neutral, but his eyes sharp. "I prefer to hear all perspectives before making final investment decisions. But," he added, holding my gaze, "my team's impression of Access AI stands on its own merits." The implication was clear. My father's intervention wouldn't undermine the progress we'd made today. Still, anxiety coiled in my chest as I followed Wright to his corner office, where Thomas Parker stood examining a wall of photos documenting Wright's various successful investments. My father turned as we entered, his expression carefully composed. He looked older than he had at the confrontation meeting, new lines etched around his mouth, a certain weariness in his stance that I'd never noticed before. Emily, he acknowledged with a slight nod. Daniel tells me the demonstration went well. It did, I confirmed, not bothering to ask how he knew about today's presentation. The Parker network of business connections had always been extensive. Wright gestured for us both to sit before taking his place behind a streamlined desk. Thomas, you mentioned a proposition. I'm listening. My father straightened his already impeccable tie. I've been reviewing the situation with VisionClear and Access AI, consulting with our legal team about the most productive path forward. You mean how to protect Mark after he stole my technology? I interjected, unable to help myself. My father frowned, but continued without addressing my comment. The fact is, we have a complex situation with significant potential value at stake. Fighting over intellectual property could drag on for years, preventing either technology from reaching market. There aren't two technologies, I pointed out. There's Access AI and there's Mark's copy of it. The core concept may be similar, my father conceded, but VisionClear has developed in different directions over recent months. Mark has expanded the business model, secured preliminary academic partnerships. Using my prototype as the foundation, I cut in, and those partnerships were based on false claims about the technology's origin. Wright held up a hand. Let's focus on the proposition, Thomas. What exactly are you suggesting? My father removed a document folder from his briefcase. A merger of interests. VisionClear LLC would be reorganized, with Emily receiving appropriate equity recognition for her original contribution. Mark would remain as CEO, focusing on business development, while Emily would lead technical innovation as CTO. I stared at him, momentarily speechless. After everything that had happened, he still expected me to hand control of my technology to Mark? The Parker family name carries significant weight in investment circles, my father continued, addressing Wright now. United, we present a stronger case for major funding than either entity would separately. Divided, we risk mutual destruction through prolonged legal battles. Wright's expression remained neutral. And what does Mark think of this arrangement? He understands the practical necessity, my father replied, his tone suggesting this had been a difficult conversation. Neither of us wanted the situation to reach this point, but here we are. I found my voice at last. Let me be clear. You want me to give Mark control of my technology he stole, and take a secondary role in my own company? I'm proposing a realistic solution, my father countered. Access AI needs business development expertise and established connections to succeed. Mark provides those, along with a demonstrated willingness to steal intellectual property, I added. Wright studied us both for a moment before speaking. Thomas, I appreciate your attempt at resolution, but I note that Emily isn't a signatory on this proposal. This appears to be a VisionClear document, presented without Access AI's involvement in its drafting. My father shifted slightly. We wanted to establish the framework before formal negotiations. I see. Wright turned to me. Emily, your thoughts? I took a deep breath, organizing my response carefully. My goal has always been to bring Access AI to the people who need it, but I won't compromise on two fundamental points: ownership of the intellectual property I developed, and control over how that technology evolves. I met my father's gaze directly. I've spent 2 years building this. I've tested every module, refined every algorithm, worked directly with users to understand their needs. Mark has spent 2 weeks trying to package my work as his own. The idea that he should lead while I support is not just insulting, it's impractical. My father's expression hardened. This idealistic stance may feel righteous, but it ignores business realities. Without proper commercialization, the best technology remains unused. That's why I've been working with Vanessa and Wright's team on a comprehensive go-to-market strategy, I countered. We've already initiated discussions with the University of Washington, 3 major learning disability advocacy organizations, and 2 educational technology platforms. Wright nodded confirmation. Her approach has been thoroughly professional, Thomas. and quite effective. For perhaps the first time in my professional life, I saw uncertainty flicker across my father's face. He had clearly expected Wright to favor his proposal, the established businessman's solution over the inexperienced developer's stance. "There's another factor to consider," I added, seizing the moment. "Trust. How could I collaborate with someone who's already demonstrated a willingness to appropriate my work? How could potential partners trust a company built on such a foundation?" Wright leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. A valid concern in an industry where reputation and intellectual integrity are crucial currencies. My father attempted one more angle. "Family businesses face conflicts all the time. They overcome them through pragmatic arrangements that benefit the collective enterprise. The Parker name has never truly included me," I finished for him, "until my work became valuable enough to steal." The blunt statement hung in the air between us. My father fell silent, perhaps truly seeing me for the first time. Not as his difficult daughter who refused to follow the expected path, but as a professional who had created something of genuine value through her own efforts. Wright broke the tension with a decisive tap on his desk. "Here's where we stand. Wright Investment Group is prepared to move forward with Access AI under Emily's leadership, based on the clearly documented development history and impressive technology demonstration today." He turned to my father. "Thomas, I respect your attempt to find a compromise, but forced partnerships between unwilling participants rarely succeed, particularly in technology ventures where innovation is the primary asset." "You're making a mistake," my father warned, though his tone lacked conviction. "The family's influence is significant," Wright acknowledged, "but substantially diminished by recent events. Mark's actions have raised questions about business practices that potential partners find concerning." The implication was clear. The Parker name, once a golden key to investment opportunities, had been tarnished by Mark's theft and the family's subsequent attempt to justify it. My father gathered his documents with deliberate movements. "I see you've made your decision. Based on the merits of the technology and the credibility of its development history," Wright confirmed, "as we always do." As my father stood to leave, he paused, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, resignation mixed with something almost like respect. "You've chosen a difficult path," he said finally. "I've chosen my own path," I corrected him. "There's a difference." After he left, Wright studied me with curious eyes. "That couldn't have been easy." I exhaled slowly. "Easier than pretending Mark's theft was acceptable. Easier than surrendering control of Access AI to someone who sees it only as a market opportunity, not a mission." "Speaking of which," Wright said, pulling a file from his desk drawer, "there's someone else you should meet before you leave today." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Jenna, could you bring Mr. Mercer in now?" A moment later, the door opened to admit a man in his 60s, casually dressed compared to the investment team, his salt and pepper beard neatly trimmed, eyes bright behind titanium frames. "Emily Parker, meet Michael Mercer, founder of Adaptive Learning Foundation." "Michael, this is the developer I told you about." Mercer extended his hand with a warm smile. "Ms. Parker, I've been hoping to meet you. My organization works with schools nationwide to implement accessibility solutions for students with learning differences." I shook his hand, recognition dawning. "Your foundation developed the first mainstream screen readers for dyslexic students. Your work inspired some of Access AI's core functionality." He looked pleased. "And now your work may revolutionize how we approach digital accessibility. I've reviewed your technology demo materials. Most impressive." "Michael's foundation has a substantial implementation grant program," Wright explained. "He's interested in discussing a partnership that could accelerate Access AI's adoption in educational institutions." The conversation that followed was everything I'd hoped for when developing Access AI, focused on implementation benefits, user impact, and expansion potential, rather than just financial returns. Mercer asked insightful questions about customization, options for different learning challenges, and shared real-world feedback from educators about existing accessibility tools. "The pattern recognition approach you've developed," he said at one point, "solves a problem we've been wrestling with for years: the high abandonment rate for accessibility tools that can't adapt to individual needs." By the time we concluded the meeting, we had outlined a pilot program for Access AI in 12 schools across 3 states, funded by Mercer's Foundation and supported by Wright's investment. "This is exactly the kind of partnership we need," I told Sarah and Vanessa as we regrouped afterward. "Implementation-focused, mission-aligned, with measurable impact metrics." Vanessa nodded, making notes on her tablet. "And the Foundation's endorsement will open doors with other educational organizations. We should prepare proposals for—" She stopped mid-sentence, her attention caught by something over my shoulder. I turned to follow her gaze and felt my stomach drop. Mark stood in the reception area, engaged in intense conversation with one of Wright's junior associates. He looked different, his usual polished appearance slightly frayed at the edges, his gestures more animated than his typically controlled demeanor. "What is he doing here?" Sarah whispered, instinctively moving closer to me. "I don't know," I murmured back. "But it can't be good." As if sensing our attention, Mark looked up, his eyes locking with mine across the space. For a moment, something almost like regret flashed across his face, quickly replaced by the determined expression I knew all too well. He concluded his conversation and walked directly toward us, his stride purposeful. Vanessa stiffened beside me, her clipboard held like a shield. "Emily," he acknowledged, stopping a few feet away. "I heard your presentation was successful. What do you want?" "Mark?" I asked, keeping my voice low but firm. He glanced around, noting the attention we were attracting from nearby staff. 5 minutes, in private, then I'll leave." Every instinct warned against it, but curiosity won out. I nodded toward a small meeting room off the main reception area. 5 minutes. Sarah started to object, but I shook my head slightly. This confrontation was inevitable. Better here, on neutral ground after a successful presentation, than elsewhere, when I might be more vulnerable. The meeting room was minimally furnished: a small table, 4 chairs, a tablet mounted on the wall, for presentations. Mark closed the door behind us but remained standing, an uncharacteristic nervous energy emanating from him. "Dad told me about his proposal," he began, "and that you rejected it." "Did you really expect anything else?" I asked. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I hadn't seen since we were teenagers. "Actually, no, but he insisted on trying." The admission surprised me. "So why are you here?" Mark paced the small room before answering. "I've spent the past 2 weeks trying to salvage Vision Clear, approaching different investors, repositioning the concept, working every connection. I have." He stopped, meeting my gaze directly. "No one will touch it. Not after word spread about the Wright meeting." "You stole my work, Mark," I said simply. "Did you think there wouldn't be consequences?" "I thought I could improve it," he countered, though without his usual arrogance. "Take what was promising but incomplete and make it market-ready. That's what I do. I see potential and develop it." "You don't develop," I corrected him. "You package and sell. There's a difference." He didn't dispute this, which itself was unusual. The North Shore Group was interested until their technical team reviewed the architecture and recognized similarities. "To your GitHub repository." Summit Ventures asked pointed questions about original development that I couldn't convincingly answer. Even Hamilton Fund, where I worked for 3 years, declined a meeting. I studied my brother, trying to understand his purpose in telling me this. "Are you looking for sympathy?" "I'm looking for a way forward," he said, his voice tighter. "My reputation in the investment community is in tatters. The Parker name, which has opened doors for generations, is now met with skepticism. Even Vanessa. He stopped himself, glancing toward the door where she waited outside. You didn't just damage your own reputation, I pointed out. You tried to build your success by erasing mine. Actions have consequences, Mark. He nodded slowly, surprising me again. Yes, they do. Which is why I'm here with a different proposal. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew a folded document. A formal retraction and acknowledgement. Vision Clear LLC will issue a public statement confirming that the core technology was developed by you, and that my attempt to claim it was inappropriate. In exchange, I ask for one thing. I took the document but didn't open it immediately. Which is? A path to redemption, he said, the words clearly difficult for him. Not partnership, not control, just the opportunity to demonstrate that I can add value legitimately. I unfolded the document, scanning its contents. The language was straightforward. A complete acknowledgement of Access AI as the original technology, a retraction of all Vision Clear claims to the contrary, and dissolution of the Vision Clear entity. Why the change of heart? I asked, suspicion, warring with curiosity. Mark's expression shifted, a rare glimpse of vulnerability breaking through his careful facade. Because Dad was wrong. About everything. About which of us truly understood innovation. About what constitutes business acumen. About which Parker was actually building something meaningful. He leaned against the wall, suddenly looking exhausted. Do you know what Michael Mercer said? When I approached his foundation last week. He said, I've already seen the original technology from the actual developer, and I'm not interested in imitations. The revelation that Mark had tried to approach the same foundation and been rejected, based on awareness of my work, was strangely satisfying. What exactly are you asking for? I pressed. A consultant position, he said. No equity, no authority over the technology, just the opportunity to contribute to business development in a transparent, legitimate capacity. To learn how to build something real instead of just packaging others' innovations. I stared at him, trying to reconcile this humbled version of Mark with the brother who had confidently announced my technology as his own just weeks ago. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't, he admitted. Not yet. That's why the position would have clear boundaries, defined deliverables, and regular review. I have to earn trust through actions, not promises. I folded the document carefully, buying time to think. And if I refuse? Then I'll issue the retraction anyway. He said quietly, It's the right thing to do regardless of whether you give me another chance. For the first time in our adult lives, I felt like I was seeing the real Mark Parker, stripped of the family mythology, the cultivated confidence, the borrowed achievements. Just a man who had made serious mistakes and was facing the consequences. I need to discuss this with my team, I said finally. And with Wright. This isn't just about you and me anymore. Mark nodded, accepting this without argument. Another first. I understand. Whatever you decide, the retraction stands. As he turned to leave, I found myself asking one last question. Was any of it real? Your interest in accessibility technology? In helping people with learning differences? He paused at the door. Not at first, he admitted. But after researching the market, after seeing the student testimonials, yes, that part became real. Too late to justify what I did, but real, nonetheless. After he left, I remained in the small meeting room, turning over both the document and the conversation in my mind. Outside, through the glass wall, I could see my future taking shape. Sarah and Talia deep in discussion with Wright's technical team, Vanessa coordinating with Michael Mercer, the momentum of Access AI's legitimate development building by the hour. And off to one side, waiting by the elevators, stood Mark. Diminished but perhaps for the first time, authentic. The moment of truth had arrived, not just for Access AI, but for the Parker family itself. Whatever I decided about Mark's request, one thing was certain. The old dynamics were shattered beyond repair. In their place stood the possibility of something new, something built on genuine achievement rather than appearance, on actual innovation rather than family mythology. I took a deep breath and walked out to join my team, the retraction document, secure in my hand, proof that finally, irrefutably, the truth had won out. 6 months passed like the seasons changing in Seattle, gradually at first, then all at once. Spring had given way to summer, and summer to a golden autumn that painted the city in warm hues. The Access AI offices occupied the 10th floor of a renovated building in South Lake Union, its open floor plan and large windows reflecting the transparent ethos I'd insisted on from the beginning. Today marked a milestone I'd once thought impossible: the official launch of Access AI's educational platform in partnership with the Adaptive Learning Foundation, now deployed in 37 schools across the country. The data was already coming in: increased reading comprehension, improved assignment completion rates, and most importantly, renewed confidence among students who had previously struggled with digital learning environments. I stood at the window of my office, watching the afternoon light play across Lake Union, my grandfather's custom keyboard sitting prominently on my desk. No longer just a memento, but a working tool I use daily, a connection to the legacy that had truly shaped me. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Vanessa entered, tablet in hand, her expression bright with contained excitement. "The university numbers just came in," she announced. 86% user retention after the trial period, and they've approved full implementation for next semester. That's 3 major universities now. I smiled, genuinely pleased but not surprised. We'd refined the platform extensively based on user feedback, each iteration more intuitive than the last. "And the learning pattern data?" "Exactly what we hoped for," she confirmed. "The algorithm is identifying customization needs faster with each new user group. Sarah says the adaptation speed has improved 23% since the initial release." Sarah had transformed from supportive friend to brilliant chief technology officer, expanding our development team from 3 to 17 programmers, all passionate about accessibility technology. Her technical leadership had been crucial in scaling Access AI from promising prototype to robust platform. "Perfect timing with the investor meeting tomorrow," I noted, glancing at the presentation materials spread across my desk. Wright's initial investment had been followed by a second funding round that exceeded expectations, attracting partners who valued both the technology's innovation and its social impact. Vanessa nodded, taking a seat in one of the ergonomic chairs we'd selected specifically to accommodate different physical needs, another reflection of our commitment to accessibility in all forms. "There's something else," she said, hesitating slightly. "The Parker Foundation called again. They're still interested in discussing the Education Accessibility Fund." The Parker Foundation, my father's latest attempt at reconciliation, established 3 months ago with an initial endowment of $10 million dedicated to advancing accessibility technology in education. An olive branch disguised as philanthropy, yet genuine in its potential impact. "What did you tell them?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Vanessa had become not just our marketing director, but a trusted advisor whose judgment I respected deeply. The same as before, that you'd consider partnerships based on mission alignment and implementation strategy, not family connections. She studied me carefully. Though I think this particular connection might be worth exploring, given their resources and reach. I moved from the window to my desk, running my fingers over my grandfather's keyboard. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of fighting for recognition outside the Parker name, I was now considering a partnership with the very institution that embodied it. "Schedule a preliminary discussion," I decided. "But make it clear we're evaluating them as we would any potential partner. No special treatment, no shortcuts. Vanessa smiled, making a note on her tablet. Already done. Thursday at 10 a.m. She paused before adding, "Your father won't be attending. He's sending the foundation director and their technical advisor instead." Another surprise, Thomas Parker voluntarily removing himself from the equation to give the partnership a better chance of success. People really could change, it seemed, when forced to confront the consequences of their actions. "And Mark's quarterly report?" I asked, changing the subject. "On your server," Vanessa replied. "The European market analysis is particularly thorough. His connections there have provided valuable insights into regulatory considerations for accessibility requirements." Mark's path to redemption had been neither quick nor easy. True to his word, he had issued the public retraction, dissolving Vision Clear and acknowledging Access AI as the original technology. I had ultimately offered him a limited consulting role. No equity, no decision-making authority, just the opportunity to contribute legitimately to business development strategy. The arrangement had been awkward at first, fraught with lingering resentment and distrust. But over months of structured collaboration, something unexpected had emerged. A working relationship based on clearly defined boundaries and mutual respect for different skills. Mark's network and market insights complemented our technical innovation, creating a stronger whole than either approach alone could have achieved. He never asked for more than the opportunity to prove his value, never presumed upon family connections, never again attempted to claim credit for others' work. Whether this transformation was born of necessity or genuine change, the results spoke for themselves in detailed reports, valuable partnerships, and transparent communication. "The launch event starts in an hour," Vanessa reminded me, standing to leave. "Sarah's already at the venue with the demonstration team." The venue was the University of Washington's Accessibility Center, where students who had participated in our beta testing would share their experiences with educators, investors, and media representatives. A legitimate celebration of actual achievement, no exaggerated claims, no polished facades hiding empty promises. As Vanessa left, my phone buzzed with a text from Leo Richardson, my former professor who now served on Access AI's advisory board. "Proud of you today. Your grandfather would be too." The simple message brought unexpected emotion. I picked up my grandfather's keyboard, now connected to my current system through a custom adapter Sarah had designed as a gift, feeling the worn keys beneath my fingertips. "We did it, Grandpa," I whispered. "We built something real." The launch event exceeded even our optimistic expectations. The university auditorium was filled to capacity, with educators, technology specialists, and accessibility advocates gathered to witness Access AI's formal introduction to the wider world. I stood at the edge of the stage, watching as a high school senior named Javier demonstrated how the platform had transformed his learning experience. Diagnosed with severe dyslexia in elementary school, he had struggled with digital content until joining our beta program. Before Access AI, reading online was like trying to catch fish with my bare hands, he explained to the audience, navigating through a complex scientific article on the main screen. The words would slip away before I could grab onto their meaning. Now the content adapts to how my brain actually works. For the first time, I'm reading at the same speed as my classmates. The demonstration continued with 5 other students, each showcasing different aspects of the technology: real-time adaptation to attention fluctuations, interface adjustments for visual processing differences, content restructuring for sequential learning challenges. Michael Mercer from the Adaptive Learning Foundation joined me on stage for the final presentation segment, highlighting the implementation data from our initial school partnerships. The metrics were compelling, but it was the testimonials from teachers and parents that truly captured the technology's impact. "My daughter used to cry when asked to read digital assignments," one mother shared via video. "Now she volunteers to read aloud in class." That transformation goes beyond academic improvement. It's about restoring confidence and joy in learning. As the formal presentation concluded and attendees moved to the demonstration area to experience the technology firsthand, I found myself surrounded by well-wishers, potential partners, and curious educators. Among them was Daniel Wright, whose initial investment had made today possible. "Quite different from that first confrontational meeting," he observed, surveying the enthusiastic crowd. "You've built something remarkable here, Emily." "With the right support," I acknowledged, genuinely grateful for his early faith in both the technology and in me. "Your team's guidance was invaluable." Wright nodded toward the university entrance where a familiar figure had just arrived. "Speaking of support, looks like you have another visitor." My father stood hesitantly at the door, more casually dressed than I'd seen him at any professional event, his expression a mixture of uncertainty and pride. He hadn't been invited specifically. This wasn't a family occasion but a professional milestone. Yet here he was, making the choice to witness this moment. "Excuse me," I said to Wright, making my way through the crowd. My father straightened as I approached, his hands clasped behind his back in that formal posture I'd known all my life. "Impressive turnout," he offered, glancing around the packed auditorium. "Thank you for coming," I said, meaning it despite our complicated history. "It wasn't necessary." "Yes, it was," he countered quietly. "I missed too many of your achievements already. I didn't want to miss this one." The simple acknowledgement that he had missed opportunities to recognize my work, that he regretted that absence, carried more weight than any elaborate apology could have. Thomas Parker had never been a man to admit mistakes easily. "Would you like to see the platform in action?" I offered. "The student demonstrations are particularly compelling." He nodded, and I led him to where Javier was showing an educator how the system adapted to his specific reading patterns. My father watched intently, asking thoughtful questions that surprised me with their technical insight. "You actually understand how this works," I observed as we moved to the next demonstration station. "I've been educating myself," he admitted. "The foundation work required a deeper understanding of accessibility technology than I had. It's been enlightening." Another unexpected development. My father voluntarily stepping outside his financial expertise to learn about a field he'd once dismissed as niche and unprofitable. "The Parker Foundation is doing important work," I acknowledged, offering the olive branch he seemed to be seeking. "Vanessa mentioned you've reached out about potential collaboration." "Only if it makes sense for Access AI," he said carefully. "The Foundation's goals align with your mission, but I understand if the family connection creates complications." "It might have," I agreed. 6 months ago. Now? "I think we can evaluate the opportunity on its merits, like any other partnership." Something eased in his posture. Not full relaxation. Thomas Parker would likely never be truly relaxed in a professional setting, but a lessening of the rigid formality he typically maintained. "Your grandfather would have loved this," he said, after a moment, watching a middle school student navigate a complex text with Access AI's assistance. "He always said technology should serve people, not the other way around." "That's why his keyboard is still on my desk," I told him. "A daily reminder of why we're building this, not just what we're building." My father nodded, a flash of genuine emotion crossing his features before he composed himself again. "I should let you get back to your guests. I just wanted to see it for myself." As he turned to leave, I found myself saying, "We're having a small team dinner after the event. Nothing formal, just celebrating the milestone. You'd be welcome to join us." The invitation surprised us both. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined voluntarily including my father in a moment of professional celebration. But standing here, watching Access AI transform learning experiences in real time, the old resentment seemed less important than acknowledging how far we'd all come. "I'd like that," he said simply. As my father made his way toward the exit, Sarah appeared at my side, observing his departure with raised eyebrows. "Progress?" she asked. "Something like that," I agreed. "Not forgetting, but maybe moving forward." Sarah squeezed my arm supportively. "Speaking of moving forward, have you seen who just arrived with Talia?" I followed her gaze to the entrance, where Talia was introducing a tall, bespectacled man to several educators. I recognized him immediately from industry publications. Adrian Chen, founder of Inclusive Design Initiative and a leading advocate for accessibility standards in technology. "He flew in from San Francisco specifically for the launch," Sarah informed me. "He's interested in discussing integration possibilities with his platform." Another door opening, another opportunity to expand Access AI's impact. The momentum was building not through family connections or aggressive self-promotion, but through demonstrated value and genuine innovation. As the event continued around me, I took a moment to absorb the scene. Educators engaged in animated discussions with our development team, students confidently demonstrating the technology, investors and accessibility advocates finding common ground in the platform's potential. This was success on my own terms, built on ability rather than family name, on innovation rather than imitation. The journey had been neither smooth nor easy, but standing here amid the tangible evidence of Access AI's impact, I knew every difficult step had been worthwhile. Later that evening, as our small team gathered at a local restaurant to celebrate, I found myself at a table that would have seemed impossible months earlier. Sarah and Talia engaged in technical discussion with Adrian Chen, Vanessa comparing marketing strategies with Michael Mercer, my father and Mark contributing to the conversation without dominating it, and me at the center of this unlikely coalition, watching as personal healing and professional success intertwined in ways I could never have predicted. The old wounds hadn't disappeared entirely. Some betrayals leave permanent marks, but they had transformed from defining limitations into hard-earned wisdom. The Parker family dynamics had been irrevocably altered, the easy assumptions and traditional hierarchies replaced by something more complex but ultimately more honest. As I raised my glass in a toast to the team that had made Access AI possible, I caught sight of my reflection in the restaurant window. Confident, purposeful, entirely my own person at last. The story Mark had tried to erase had instead become stronger, clearer, impossible to ignore. And in that moment of quiet triumph, I finally understood what my grandfather had meant all those years ago. I wasn't born to be their favorite. I was born to outgrow them, and I had. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.